Having done masterclasses for shredder gauntlets, spike throwers, and bolt blasters, today I want to tackle the final new weapon in Forbidden West, warrior bows. To be honest with you guys, I haven't been much of a warrior bow fan, but in the process of making this video, I may have actually convinced myself to make the switch. So if you're on the fence about warrior bows or want to learn how to use them more effectively, this video is for you. We'll cover the mechanics that make warrior bows unique, different ways you can use them, the best bows and how to coil them, and the weapon techniques and Valor surges you'll want to use. By the end of the video, you'll have everything you need to master warrior bow gameplay. So let's go. Warrior bows are fast-firing, short-range weapons that reward playing a bit riskier by getting up close and personal with your target. Beyond having a fast fire rate, they also have some other unique mechanics that make them especially well-suited for close-quarters combat. The most important one is that they don't have a penalty for tap firing. Unlike hunter and sharpshot bows, which get a 50% damage reduction when tap fired, warrior bows deal full damage no matter how much they're drawn, which means the best way to use them is to shoot them as fast as possible. In fact, even though some warrior bows can be overdrawn for extra damage, it's pretty much never worth doing so. Accuracy isn't impacted by movement either, so it's totally okay to move around while using a warrior bow to make yourself harder to hit and potentially take advantage of agility perks or coils. Warrior bows also have a high critical hit damage multiplier of 2x, which means when a warrior bow light arrow hits for a crit, it will deal double damage. The default 5% chance of getting a crit is low, but the fast fire rate plus firing multiple arrows at once using weapon techniques increases the chance you'll get crits a lot and makes a crit build very viable. Don't worry about wasting resources on all the arrows you're firing off either, because warrior bow ammo is super cheap. It costs just 1 shard and 2 pieces of ridgewood to craft 12 light arrows, or 18 if you have the ammo expert skill leveled up to max. At a workbench it's even better. You'll get the same amount for 1 shard and just 1 ridgewood, because, you know, I was really worried about running out of all this free ridgewood. But seriously, these cheap arrows are one of the reasons warrior bows are so attractive. So, there are a few ways you can leverage these features to make warrior bows a powerful part of your loadout. But before we dive into each one, for all of these tactics, you need to know how to fire a warrior bow as fast as possible. For regular shots, you can simply spam R2 to get the fastest possible fire rate. But for the highest damage output, you're going to want to use the spread shot weapon technique to fire 5 arrows at once, and spamming R1 with spread shot doesn't work very well. Sometimes it goes really fast for 2 or 3 shots, but then you'll get an awkward pause. So you can still spam R1 and get decent results, but it won't be nearly as fast as it could be. The trick to nailing this is all about timing. You want to release your shots just after you see the special reticle of horizontal dots appear and begin to compress. Once you see it starting to pinch inwards, let go of R1 quickly and then immediately press it again, holding briefly until you see the dots beginning to move again. Firing at this precise moment prevents the animation from starting over from the beginning and lets you fire much faster. I find the best way to nail this is to focus on when you release R1 instead of when you hit it. You should be holding down on R1 almost all the time and just releasing it very quickly when you see the dots starting to compress. It's a good idea to practice this outside of combat first. Load up on 9 stamina potions and then do a quick save. Now just practice firing at the ground or straight forward into the air. With max stamina, you can fire 5 spread shots. Craft arrows and drink a potion after each set and repeat. When you run out of potions, just restart from the last save to practice some more. It can also help to mute your audio and just focus on the dot reticle on screen, because sometimes the firing sounds can be distracting. This same type of firing method works for the 3-arrow burst fire weapon technique too. For that one, you'll just want to wait for the circle to start shrinking. However, I definitely recommend using spread shot over burst fire. Okay, now that we know how to fire fast, let's cover some different ways you can actually use a warrior bow. First, you can use it to simply deal a lot of impact damage very quickly. In this way, the warrior bow functions as a high DPS weapon similar to a bolt blaster. One of the best ways to maximize damage is to first freeze a machine into the brittle state using frost arrows and then unleash a bunch of 5-arrow spread shots. Brittle removes the ability of armor plates to block damage and can give a damage boost of up to 2x, so you can really deal a lot of damage quickly. Once you run out of stamina for spread shots, you can drink a stamina potion to keep going, or just fire off regular single arrow shots until the brittle state wears off. A similar tactic is to use acid ammo to trigger the corroding state. The corroding state won't directly multiply damage like brittle will, but it does let you deal more damage through armor plates. Plus, certain warrior bows have perks for extra damage to corroding enemies. The corroding state also doubles your weapon's base critical hit chance, which, for warrior bows, gives us an extra 5%. Speaking of crits, creating a warrior bow crit build by loading up on critical hit chance coils can be very very strong. Remember, we get double damage from critical hits, and each arrow from the multi-arrow weapon techniques can hit for a crit as well. So with spread shot, if we get all 5 arrows to crit, we'll get 10 times the damage of a single arrow. Stack that with the 2x damage bonus from brittle and use a Valor surge like Ranged Master, and we're talking about some serious damage potential. By the way guys, if you enjoy these weapon masterclass videos, let me know by leaving a like down below. That helps me know what kind of videos you want to see more of and helps out the channel too. Anyway, as strong as a crit build can be, using some of the 25% coils can be even stronger. Unfortunately, I think Guerrilla knew this could be a little bit overpowered, which is why they didn't let us use close range coils on warrior bows. But we can still do really well with melee follow-up and knockdown damage. Melee follow-up is the easiest to trigger. Just give the machine a good whack with R1, and for about 6 to 8 seconds afterwards, you'll get a damage boost from the melee follow-up coils. If you find yourself doing critical strikes instead of the regular melee hits, which won't activate the coils, then a good trick is to stand facing away from the machine before doing the light attack, since the animation will swing Aloy's spear around anyway. We have Paris to thank for sharing that trick with me over on Discord, along with a ton of other research he did on warrior bow mechanics to help me out with this video. So thank you Paris for sharing all your hard work. If you don't like the melee follow-up build, then another good build would be to use knockdown damage coils. These also boost damage by 25% each, and work while a machine is in the knockdown state. Knockdowns are super useful, and my favorite way to reliably trigger them is with drill spikes. If you want to learn all about knockdown, then I'll link my video on damage types down below where I cover its mechanics in depth. But if you can knock a machine down, then you can use the knockdown coils to boost damage very easily while the machine is stunned. Regardless of which damage build you decide to go with, remember you'll want to either freeze or trigger the corroding state first and then use the spread shot weapon technique to maximize damage output. And keep in mind it's smart to try and aim for components and weak points when possible to increase damage and harvest more resources. Warrior bows can also be really useful for applying elemental states, but not in the way you might think. Sure, you can load up on elemental coils to boost elemental buildup, but it's actually much more effective to use knockdown damage and melee follow-up coils. These actually also boost elemental buildup, and remember they're 25% as opposed to the 15% that the elemental coils are. So you can either hit a machine with a melee attack or knock them down to make elemental buildup faster with these coils equipped. Another option is to use the instant elemental coils. In fact, warrior bows are pretty much the best and only weapon to use these on because of the high fire rate. For example, you can load up on a bunch of instant frost coils and then just fire regular arrows as fast as possible. Each shot has a chance to trigger the elemental state, and with a fast fire rate, it will typically happen pretty quickly. Unfortunately, the chance to trigger the instant coils is tied to the shot, not each arrow, so spread shot or burst fire won't help here. Instead, you should just spam R2 to fire regular shots as quickly as possible. Also, you should know that instant coils of different types will pool their instant chances together to trigger any one of their effects. So for a really interesting build, you can load up on a variety of different elemental instant coils and watch the states cycle through at random on a machine. Warrior bows can also be a great complement to melee combat. The fast draw speed and lack of penalties for tap firing and movement make them excellent for fighting up close against any enemy, but especially human ones. Primarily, you'll want to focus on using the warrior bow to trigger resonator blasts, as these are one of the most powerful melee combat mechanics for dealing damage. I've also found that the melee detonator weapon technique can be useful against human enemies wearing armor. Melee detonator attaches explosive charge arrows to the target, which are triggered with a melee attack. Explosive damage ignores armor, so this can be a good way to deal damage to heavily armored rebels. Just keep in mind that you can only have 4 explosive arrows set at once. Firing a 5th will cause the first to disappear. Okay, let's run through which warrior bows you'll want to consider at each stage of the game. If you want to start playing with them early, then pick up the Swift Warrior Bow in Barren Light. You can also get the Shock Warrior Bow for free by simply speaking with Thurles and the Groundskeeper at the Daunt Hunting Grounds. You don't even have to do any of the Hunting Grounds trials. Neither of these green bows are great, but the Swift lets you start playing with regular light arrows for damage and tear, and the Shock Bow gives you some shock ammo early on when you have very limited access to this element. Warrior bows become much more viable at the blue rarity though. My pick for damage would be the Melee Warrior Bow from Scalding Spear because it has slightly higher impact damage and tear stats compared to the Shearing. It also has a 40% boost for melee follow-up and a solid 25% corroding enemy damage perk when fully upgraded, so it can be very strong when combined with melee hits, the corroding state, or both. If you like applying elemental states with warrior bows, then both the Acid from Plainsong and the Frostbite from Scalding Spear are good options, depending on which elements you're looking for. Personally, I'd lean towards the Acid since it has shock arrows, and I'd use a Hunter Bow or Blastling for Frost at this stage of the game. You can also pick up the Acid a little earlier than the Frostbite. For purple rarity bows, I have have 3 recommendations: the Death Rattle from Scalding Spear, the Renegade from Thornmarsh, and the Firestorm, which comes from a side quest. The Death Rattle has the highest impact damage stat, so it works best with 25% coils like melee follow-up and knockdown damage. It also has some nice built-in perks for knockdown and shocked enemy damage. You can also do a crit build on this bow with 3 15% crit chance coils. If you're interested in a crit build though, the Renegade is a good option too. Its impact damage maxes out at 47, but its 15% critical hit chance perk means you can push the total critical hit chance to 65%, compared to the Death Rattle's max of 50%. If you do the math on a pure crit build, it works out to be almost exactly the same between the 2 bows. Plus, the Renegade has frost arrows instead of fire, which are way more useful. Don't be afraid to mix coils either. For example, I like Paris's recommendation of using 2 instant frost coils and 1 critical hit chance coil on the Renegade for a nicely balanced build. Either way, the Death Rattle and Renegade are good options in the late game. If you're interested in an elemental warrior bow, then the Firestorm is the ultimate one, giving you access to shock, acid, and fire light arrows. You get this bow from the Gate of the Vanquished side quest, and without spoiling anything, it doesn't matter which choice you make at the end. I don't really recommend using the adhesive warrior bow at all, unless someday adhesive gets a buff to make it more useful. Other than access to adhesive arrows, this bow has the lowest impact damage and doesn't have much else going for it. If you're in your first playthrough, then the only legendary warrior bow you can get is the Karja's Bane, which is actually one of the easiest legendary weapons to obtain since you only need to complete all the gauntlet runs. The Karja's Bane's max of 48 impact damage is less than the New Game Plus legendary Rain of Sparks, and actually also the Death Rattle, both of which max out at 52 impact damage. But remember, legendary weapons get 5 coil slots, so the Karja's Bane can certainly outclass the Death Rattle. The Rain of Sparks, on the other hand, has 5 coil slots too, and it has really solid perks for critical hit chance, critical hit damage, and knockdown damage, so it appears to be superior. Unfortunately, it also has a 6% instant burning chance perk, which can be quite annoying when it overrides other states you've built up like Brittle, which happens fairly often. For this reason, similar to how I choose the Blast Forge Bolt Blaster over the Brawl Breaker, I'd personally crown the Karja's Bane as the best warrior bow. Keep in mind, its perks for agility and melee follow-up let you almost instantly gain another 65% damage boost. Plus, the perks for corroding enemy damage and knockdown power can be nice too. But if you're set on using the Rain of Sparks, then consider putting a burning enemy damage coil on it, so you can at least get some higher damage when that instant burning state sneaks up on you. Speaking of coils more broadly, other elemental state damage coils like corroding and shocked can be decent coil options for warrior bows as well. But the melee follow-up, knockdown damage, and critical hit chance coils that we discussed earlier are definitely the most powerful options. Other good options include agility coils, which boost damage while sliding or falling, and impact coils, which simply boost the base impact damage stat of your arrows. If you can get your hands on enough of them, the 15% concentration coil is always a good option too, but you can only get 1 per playthrough. It comes from the Scorcher in the What Was Lost side quest, and fortunately, the bug that required you to loot it super fast was actually just fixed in patch 1.18. It's much easier to get now, and it's a super useful coil, so make sure you pick that up on your next playthrough. We've already covered all the weapon techniques for warrior bows, so I'll just reiterate that Spread Shot is definitely the most powerful for dealing damage and probably the one you'll want to use most often. Burst Fire really isn't great in most situations, except for smaller machines and humans, so it can be useful in the early game, but you should start using Spread Shot as soon as possible. Melee Detonator is, as we discussed, more situational, but it can come in handy for fighting humans. As for Valor Surges, Ranged Master is, as always, my top pick since it boosts damage by 100% when using a weapon technique like Spread Shot. Critical Boost can also work well if you're going for a crit build. At level 3, it gives you a 70% boost to critical hit chance while using a weapon technique, which means you only need 1 or 2 crit chance coils and you can use the remaining slots for other coils to increase damage further. It's also worth noting that because you can fire a warrior bow so quickly, they can help you build up Valor much faster than other weapons. Every time you hit an enemy, you get a couple of Valor points, so you can imagine how firing off shots quickly with a warrior bow will add up. Plus, if you target weapons, components, or weak spots, you get even more Valor. Alright guys, that's my masterclass for warrior bows. I hope all of these tips help you master warrior bow gameplay and maybe reconsider having one in your loadout. I know I'm going to be playing around with them a bit more than I used to. If you enjoyed the video or learned something new, leaving a like would be much appreciated. And leave a comment down below if you have a warrior bow tip I didn't mention. As always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.